My name is Riz Gargazi. I'm the Acting Deputy Director for the Hazardous Waste Management Program at DTSC. I want to welcome you and thank you for participating today on this informational seminar on universal waste and the regulations for PV modules. Over the past few years, California has been leading the way with renewable energy initiatives, which solar is a component of outcome. One outcome of these initiatives that DTSC is mindful of is potential large growth of solar panels, waste and the waste stream that it generates in the future. DTSC supports this initiative, but also must fulfill our duty to ensure that waste that are determined to be hazardous waste are managed in a way that protects citizens of California and its environment. Therefore, DTSC is being proactive in developing a streamlined method of managing solar panels and continue to encourage the use of renewable energy technology in the future. DTSC also understands that with enactment of the renewable initiatives throughout the state, some entities may not know who DTSC is, or what we do, and what we oversee. The purpose of this seminar is to provide you with an overview of DTSC's oversight of hazardous waste, California's Universal Waste Management Program, and the proposal to add solar panels to that program for streamlined and safe management of these wastes. This is your opportunity to ask us any questions you may have on universal waste and any question on the solar panels. For those stakeholders who have been involved for the development of these regulations for the last several years, I want to thank you for your continued participation and patience as we develop a management framework for solar panels. As you will see, much of the project team has changed. So this seminar also serves a method to introduce ourselves. I'll introduce our staff in a few minutes. We'll still plan a public notice in April, but wanted to provide a more educational and open forum to ask questions before we enter into the formal APA process. But before I hand over the stage to the project manager, I want to go over some housekeeping rules that we have. And before I do that, I want to introduce the team. So on my far right is Jessica Twining. She's the unit supervisor for the policy development. On her left is Vladi Lang. She's the branch chief for the program and policy program. And the most important person here is Dr. Cho Soo Ken. She's the project manager for the solar panel. So she'll do the presentation this morning. With that, I want to introduce Cho Soo Ken. She's the project manager. So she'll go over the presentation.
Good morning, everyone. You can hear me okay? All right. So today I will be presenting information regarding and related to proposed photovoltaic modules regulations. Our hazardous waste management program, Deputy Director Rizka already introduced what the program is and explained a little bit of what it does, so I'll skip that. I would like to first just say that it's been a great opportunity for me to be working under hazardous waste management program within DTSC. Within the program, I am in the policy development group, and I am the project manager for this solar panel rulemaking. So in general, DTSC oversees all waste that are hazardous. That includes waste such as waste from industry and manufacturing processes, as well as household waste that are commonly known as universal waste, such as electronic devices and batteries, which are still hazardous, but a little less obvious that they're hazardous. So that said, we'll inform you today of DTSC's Universal Waste Management Standard, and I explain to you in details of our rulemaking process for solar panels. Throughout the seminar, I will be using the terms photovoltaic modules, PV modules, and solar panels interchangeably, but keep in mind that they all mean the same for us for this rulemaking. So like I said, we'll begin with giving you an oversight of the universal waste management, and then we will dive into the details of today's proposed regulation text on solar panels, and we will conclude the seminar informing you of project timeline for the solar panel rulemaking process and how you can be involved in the process throughout. So that said, let's begin with what hazardous waste is. A waste can be hazardous waste if it is specifically listed as a known hazardous waste in, let's say, either federal or state-specific hazardous waste list. So those listed hazardous wastes are from common manufacturing and industrial processes. They're also from specific industries, as well as they can be generated from discarded commercial products. A second type of hazardous waste is a waste that exhibits characteristic of toxicity, reactivity, ignitability, and corrosiveness. So there are two ways to define what a hazardous waste is. In California, there are two sets of hazardous waste classifications, and they're derived from respective laws and regulations. So we have Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, which is federal law under US EPA oversight, and we have Health and Safety Code, Hazardous Waste Control Law under DTSC oversight. Implementing regulations are Code of Federal Regulations, CFR Title 40, and California Code of Regulations, CCR Title 22. So wastes that are under, federal laws and regulations would be called RCRA hazardous waste. And for the California purpose, those wastes that are specific to California would be titled as non-RCRA hazardous waste. So generators are responsible to make a determination of whether a waste is first hazardous, if that hazardous waste is either federal or state-specific hazardous waste, as well as from that determination, the generator needs to determine how to manage that waste based on what type of hazardous waste it is. So that said, California is authorized by federal US EPA to oversee federal hazardous waste program on behalf of US EPA. So because of that, DTSC oversees both federal and California hazardous waste programs. Hazardous waste characteristic that is most relevant for today's topic on solar panel rulemaking is characteristic for toxicity. These are hazardous wastes that fail toxicity criteria, are toxic or they're harmful to human health and environment. First of all, those toxic substances can enter human body through ingestion, inhalation, or also absorption through skin. Those toxic substances can also leach from the waste and pollute the environment, such as by, entering to either soil or groundwater. So those hazardous wastes are bad for the environment and also for humans. Some hazardous wastes that have toxicity characteristic are hard to tell just from the look that they are hazardous. So for those wastes, then toxicity testing is required to determine if that waste is hazardous. So standardized toxicity test procedures that are used to determine if a waste is hazardous are toxicity characteristic leaching procedure, which is a federal testing procedure. And we have total threshold limit concentrations followed by waste extraction test to determine soluble threshold limit concentrations, which are California-specific toxicity test procedure to determine a waste is hazardous or not. So there are threshold limits concentrations established for toxicity test procedures. So let's say if a sample is tested and that sample contains a certain substance that is above a toxicity threshold concentration that is established in these procedures and standards, then that sample is considered to be hazardous because it is showing characteristic for toxicity. Are there any questions up to this point? All right, I'll move on then. So now that we know a little bit about what hazardous waste is, we'll transition on to universal waste. Universal waste are universally generated hazardous waste. They are still hazardous waste, but they're considered, they're managed under alternative management standard. Alternative management standard is the universal waste management standard because certain categories of hazardous waste meet universal waste criteria. Those universal waste criteria are such as if a waste is hazardous, if that hazardous waste is low risk, if the waste is generated by a wide variety of generators, as well as if the waste is generated sporadically by a large number of generators. So those are the universal waste criteria that we use to determine if the waste could be under universal waste management. Universal waste management is self-implementing authorization. What it means is that those that manage universal waste are deemed authorized to manage the waste as long as they comply with the universal waste management standards as specified in the California Code of Regulations. By managing these low-risk hazardous waste as universal waste under universal waste management allows us to streamline universal waste management for diverse sets of generators. It allows us to divert these hazardous waste from ending up in solid waste landfills for proper treatment, recycle, or disposal. And we're also complying with and implementing hazardous waste regulations. And also conserving resources by recycling them where possible. So California universal waste rules applies to handlers, transporters, and destination facilities. Universal waste handler, the definition of universal waste handler includes generators of universal waste as well as those that accepts, stores, accumulates, and treat universal waste. Universal waste transporters are those that transport universal waste off-site via air, land, or water. Universal waste transporters in general have a lesser requirements than full hazardous waste transportation. That's one of the, I guess, advantage of universal waste standards. So universal waste transporters don't need to use a manifest or use a registered hazardous waste hauler to transport universal waste. Universal waste destination facilities are facilities that treat, recycle, or dispose of the waste. So categorizing as universal waste allows generators and handlers to manage the waste as universal waste without requiring to test. Currently in California, universal waste include batteries, electronic devices, mercury-containing equipment, lamps, CRTs and CRT glass, and aerosol can. And now we are proposing to add solar panels under California universal waste management. All right, so why is DTSC proposing to add solar panels under universal waste management? First of all, we know that the use and demand for solar panels as renewable energy sources are expanding in California. Our state government also promotes these renewable energy initiatives. For example, California's renewable portfolio standard establishes, or more like requires, 60% of California energy to be derived from a renewable energy source by 2030. Another example would be that California Energy Commission establishes building standards requiring all new homes in California to install solar power systems starting 2020. Because of these statewide initiatives, we're seeing that there are more solar panels being installed in California. As well as because of that, more solar panel waste are generated presently in California. We also predict that there will be more of these waste generated in the future. Like Rizgar said, DTSC supports these renewable energy initiatives that are happening, and we determined that a solution is needed for proper management and disposal of these solar panel waste. We also receive a lot of encouragement and support from other state agencies and from the industry to provide a streamlined approach for proper management and disposal of solar panel waste. In this rulemaking, we define photovoltaic modules, aka PV module, aka solar panels, as a device consisting of photovoltaic cells that are designed to convert solar radiation into electrical energy. In this rulemaking, photovoltaic module includes parts that are part of the solar panel itself, such as cables, wires, batteries, junction boxes, inverters, etc. Solar panels could be from various technologies, such as thin film or crystalline silicon technology. However, for this rulemaking, we don't include photovoltaic modules. In the term photovoltaic modules, we don't include glass mirrors, pure glass mirrors that are used to concentrate solar power systems. So how are solar panels hazardous? Well, first of all, we know that solar panels contain heavy metals such as lead, arsenic, cadmium that have a toxic potential towards humans and also harmful to the environment. At certain levels, these metallic elements have a high degree of toxicity towards humans. These metal elements are also a concern for the environment because they can pollute the environment by, for example, leaching into soil or groundwater. Secondly, from published literature test results, we know that when solar panels were tested using federal and state-specific toxicity testing procedures, some of the solar panels are found to have metals above these toxicity threshold concentrations. So those solar panels waste would be either recreational or non-recreational waste, and they need to be managed as hazardous waste under current hazardous waste management requirements. Keep in mind that not all solar panels tested are found to be hazardous. So those solar panels they're not tested non-hazardous, could be treated as a non-hazardous waste. So if a person or like a generator thinks that a solar panel is not hazardous, either by testing or by generator's knowledge of materials that are in the solar panel, or by other proofs, then that generator can manage the waste as non-hazardous waste. So, but make sure that it is generator's responsibility to determine if the solar panels is hazardous or not and treat the waste as such.
Can you give us an idea of what kind of fraction of solar panels that have been tested as hazardous?
I can point you to the literature references that have the details of what kind of testing is done, but on top of my head, I don't have the answer to that. These are all published literature test results. So
DTSC done any testing on its own?
We have not.
And for the audience, we are going to ask you to speak into the microphone as we're being recorded, and that way those who are on the webinar can understand the question.
The question was, has the DTSC done any testing of solar panels?
At this time, we have not.
If I understand it correctly, we would have to test each and every solar panel in order to process them?
It is generators. It could be either based on generators' knowledge of the materials used in the solar panels, or it could also be by testing. But if you manage the waste as universal waste, then as we're proposing right now, then you don't need the testing to manage the waste as universal waste.
To further clarify the answer to the question, for the alternative standards being proposed under universal waste, it gives one an option. One can determine that or understand that their material is not hazardous waste and manage it as a non-hazardous waste, and that's fine. But if a generator believes or understands or has tests to determine that their material is a hazardous waste, under these regulations, when finalized, they have an option to manage them as a universal waste. So one does not have to do that, but what happens is if you manage it under the universal waste rules, you do not have to proactively go and test. Does that make sense? Okay.
Just so we're on the same page, standard solar modules, single crystal, multi-crystal, more than 95% of them have no hazard materials. Only thin films are in question. So can't we have DTSC look at the thin film issue versus crystalline modules and make it really clear so we're not, onus isn't on us to have to prove it? It's a pretty clear dividing line. As I understand it, we're trying to streamline the process in California. And these are roadblocks that we see that are very difficult.
Okay. Sorry, can I answer his question first? That's a great, I guess, suggestion. But so far, from these published literature test results, which are tested using both either crystalline silicon technology or on the thin films, they are still found to contain these metals above threshold concentrations. And there are also solar panels that were made many years ago that are still used, and now they're just becoming waste. And technology changes and improves, so I understand that we're going towards, I guess, non-hazardous path, but we cannot tell for a fact that which solar panels are hazardous and not, just based on the look of it. So we cannot, at this point, differentiate between which technology is hazardous and which one isn't.
We have one question here first.
Oh.
Given that DTSC is not planning to do any testing, does DTSC plan to publish any kind of a compendium of the analysis or a summary of the analysis that you're relying on to move forward with this regulation?
So we will have, we'll submit the the regulation package to Office of Administrative Law pretty soon. And there is a set of documents in the package. And in the initial statement of reasoning, we give references on which test results we relied on. So those would be the references that you can go to look up for those testing.
Could you do that earlier in the process so we are more informed as soon as possible?
Okay, I'm going to ask you to hold your question, and then we will take your question after the two individuals who are ahead of you.
Hi, I'm Kristen DeLallo. I'm from California Electronic Asset Recovery. We're an electronic waste recycler. So we get many inquiries about solar lights in the garden. And so what are you proposing that you're going to do with the PV modules integrated into the structure of items like calculators and these things that we get constant inquiries for? What are we going to do with those?
You're ahead of the curve. Okay, so those solar panels that are integrated into other devices such as calculator or lights, they would be managed as electronic devices and the lamps, etc. So they would not be managed as solar panel universal waste.
Okay, Thanks.
And I will ask, I do have your hand. I will ask that we have not gone through the reg text yet. So if you have a question that may be answered after Chosu's presentation, I ask that you can allow us to finish the presentation, go through the regulatory text, and then bring up the question at the time we go through the regulatory text, the proposed text.
Do manufacturers have any, or importers have any labeling requirements?
There are certain labeling requirements under universal waste management to label a certain way for these universal waste solar panels.
But not the elements.
Not the elements, not the individual elements that are, or substances that are in the solar panel, no.
Thank you. Going back to my original question, I think it would benefit all stakeholders for a better understanding of the analytical foundation, the hazardous analytical foundation that you're all relying on. Just in the interest of transparency,
Sure.
of full disclosure. As you know, the industry has, the recycling industry essentially has been shut down in this state. And since the passage of Senator Monning's bill to authorize the treatment of PV modules as universal waste, that was, what, in 2015? That's a significant amount of time that has passed, as you know. I think we would all agree that expediency is a high priority at this point, given the impacts that delay and certain DTSC communications to hazardous, panel processors has the impact of that on the industry. Having said that, I think it still behooves DTSC, I would submit, to be as transparent as possible, as early as possible in this stage, given how long we've waited for the state to finalize these regulations. There appears to be an analytical leap that you're making, at least in terms of what is publicly available for us to review. I totally appreciate what the literature may say, and I do appreciate the legacy modules out there as well, as you indicated. But having said all that, I think it would still behoove the state, DTSC, to be as transparent and forthcoming as possible, as early as possible. So I would encourage you to submit that sort of analytical foundation for the public to review.
I definitely appreciate your comments and your suggestion, and DTSC is trying to be as transparent as we could be. And that said, if you have any technical questions or anything about this rulemaking, I suggest you can contact me directly. Phone conversation is probably best because that way I can, answer to your specific questions and really, sit down and get to give you the answers that you're looking for, or try to guide you to the right direction that way. Sure. One more question?
Doug Coble, California Product Stewardship Council. I think this might be a question for the Deputy Director. Can you give us a status on the federal waiver request that you put in, that should have been put in order to designate these as universal waste?
Do you mind clarifying what you mean by federal waiver? I don't believe that's a process we go through.
In my conversations with one of your senior counsel, you guys are working through the Attorney General's office to get a federal waiver to allow you to designate these as universal waste. And my understanding from that senior counsel is that once you get granted the waiver, it's going to be a one-year process. And so I'm trying to get the idea of how long will the regulations be delayed in full approval pending that waiver.
So it's actually not quite a waiver, it's actually authorization. So we're seeking federal authorization for our universal waste program. And you're required to get authorized for this specifically because universal waste is regulated under less stringent standards than normal hazardous waste. That said, we've been working very closely with EPA, US EPA and the Attorney General's office, and we're pretty close to submitting our package, which is actually a much quicker process once it's done. So it should be done long before, probably midway through this rulemaking, if not earlier.
Good morning. My name is Evelyn Butler from the Solar Energy Industries Association. In addition to the literature review that you've done, have you done any physical review with the products themselves or visited any manufacturers or worked with any of the manufacturers to understand what the constituents are in the products themselves?
Okay, I will admit that I'm a rookie when it comes to solar panel rulemaking. I am fairly new to DTSC. However, they are my, previous project managers who have worked on this rulemaking, and they have done some, analysis on those physical data on solar panels.
Will that also be part of the information that's provided in terms of the analysis, the technical analysis, to show us how you've come down to this path and to the regulations?
We do not include previous rulemaking, items in current proposed regulation. And the reason is mainly not to confuse the regulated community on two different, what was before and what is now. That makes it a lot more confusing. So we are preparing this package based on the latest and up-to-date information that we have available.
And I do want to caveat, please keep in mind that the intent behind the PV mod, the proposed regulations to add solar panels under PV mod, the proposed PV mods under universal waste is that if a generator or if a handler determines or believes that the panels are hazardous waste, they have a regulatory option to manage the material that's waste under these less stringent requirements. If they understand that the material is not a hazardous waste, they are free to manage it accordingly. So we are not saying by this rulemaking that all solar panels, when discarded, must be managed as a hazardous waste and can be managed as a universal waste. What we're saying is that if we understand or if we have knowledge, whether I'm the person who's removing the solar panels from my business, or if I'm the entity that's collecting them, consolidating them, accumulating them, if I understand them to be hazardous, I do not have to follow the full hazardous waste requirements. I can manage them under the universal waste rules, which are less stringent and would allow me to manage the material and send them for further recycling opportunities. So they are options to full regulatory requirements as a hazardous waste. So I just wanted to make sure it's clear. We do understand, as Chosu said early on, that all solar panels are not hazardous waste. There are many solar panels that are non-hazardous, don't contain high levels or levels that exceed regulatory thresholds. If that's the case, they are managed just like any spent material that is not a hazardous waste. If they are, this gives some handlers options to recycle them in a manner that is less costly, more streamlined, more efficient. So these are opportunities.
Oh, there's an online question also.
Okay,
Will you read it?
Yeah.
Okay.
We got an online question from Roshni Krishnasingh with EDP Renewables North America. It says, I'm listening in on the solar panel informational seminar, and I'm wondering when DTSC expects to finalize the universal waste regulations for PG modules.
At the end of this seminar, we will give you an estimate of the timeline that we project for this rulemaking process, so you'll have all the information of when it'll be finalized. All right, is there one more question?
A little bit more of a comment. There is urgency in the industry. You guys are feeling it probably, and I think because of the contact you've seen lately. To make sure everybody understands, we've been working in this business for some time. There's about 7 million pounds of solar panels being installed every single day. 7 million pounds. It's substantiated through SEIA's website. In California, our hands are tied. We can't even move these panels once they come down. It's a big issue. Solar panels are being stored in warehouses. They're left in fields. They're being thrown out. They're being illegally dumped. And as an industry, we're trying to bring some visibility to it and also to make some forward movement. The reclassifying as universal waste is one issue, for sure. But the other issues that we see in some of the language is how recycling might happen in California. Some of the language talking about not being able to use water, for instance, in processing. We're really concerned about regulating how that recycling might happen, rather than leaving it open to the technology that might be at least in line with regular recycling. So these are my concerns, not only for moving forward, but also how that might happen. It's not just changing. It's not a silver bullet saying it's universal waste. It's what happens after that.
Thank you, Letty.
Thank you for that comment. Before we go down the path of responding to that, I'm going to ask that we allow Antosu to finish the presentation here and actually go through the regulatory text, especially for those who have not yet gone through them. That is part of today's seminar.
We'll get there. Okay. All right. I guess thank you all for the questions. I'm going to continue with the presentation and see how it unfolds. Oh, I guess I didn't even know where we are in the presentation. I guess we're at the right time. We can continue because we have answered a good amount of questions. If you have any more questions, I can answer. Or if you need a break, we can take either 5 or 10 minutes break and come back. It's all up to you. Move on? Okay, let's move on then. Tough crowd. All right. So now we're getting to the core of today's seminar on solar panel rulemaking. We'll get into the details of the proposed regulation text on solar panels. We will begin with Chapter 10. Chapter 10 of Title 22 of California Code of Regulations is where we house all the definitions that are used in both hazardous waste management and also in universal waste management chapters. We put the terms and definitions that are in the proposed regulation text in Chapter 10 because we want to make sure that all these common languages are covered. That's about it for Chapter 10. That takes us to Chapter 11. Chapter 11 describes what hazardous waste are. In the Chapter 11, it also contains exemptions and exclusions from these hazardous waste. So under an exemption section in Chapter 11, we added solar panels to be exempt from fully regulated hazardous waste requirements as long as those wastes are managed as universal waste. So with this exemption, it allows hazardous waste solar panels to be managed as universal waste under Chapter 23. So what is Chapter 23? Chapter 23 contains universal waste management requirements for handlers, transporters, and destination facilities to follow. Chapter 23 is designed to be a standalone chapter, and all the universal waste requirements for all universal waste are in this Chapter 23. This makes it easy for anybody who manages universal waste to have only one chapter to go to look up all the requirements instead of having to flip through multiple chapters. So that said, All the universal waste requirements for solar panels in this proposed regulations are in Chapter 23. Keep in mind that waste that are managed under Chapter 23 are still hazardous waste. So as soon as the waste is not managed as universal waste, then the waste must be managed as hazardous waste. So Article 1 of Chapter 23 provides general information about what the universal wastes are, such as categories of universal waste, what applies as universal waste, what doesn't apply, and also definitions that are used in Chapter 23. Okay, so to this section, we added solar panels to be on the list of categories of universal waste to be managed under Chapter 23. So by doing that, we make it official universal waste PV modules. Do you have a question?
Oh, on this, okay.
Previous slide?
No, go back, forward.
One forward?
Yeah.
Forward?
There. When you're ready, I'll have a question.
Okay, sure. He's just getting ready. I got that. Okay. So under the applicability section, we describe what solar panels are applied as universal waste and what are not covered as universal waste. Okay?
Hi, I have a quick question. What is the difference between handling used solar panels and transferring those, and they're going to be reused, not thrown away, versus handling brand new ones? Is there any difference between shipping, moving a pallet of brand spanking new panels versus something that's been taken off of a roof and we're going to put it back on another roof someplace else?
Like a refurbishment?
Refurbishment, or just wash them up and they still work and they're good.
Right. At that point, that is no longer a universal waste. Then it is not part of a universal waste because the solar panel is still in use. So it is not even a waste anymore at that point.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
My name is Larry Sweetser on behalf of rural counties and a lot of household hazardous waste and solid waste facilities. My comment is on this, but can you go back to slide 7?
7.
Yeah.
7. Okay. What's on slide 7?
And for reference, I've been following this since the beginning. Part of my job is explaining regulations to solid waste facilities, household hazardous waste managers. And it's hard enough right now explaining universal waste. And I do appreciate the department going forward with this, and I think there's a lot of good things in here. But one of the key problems I see with this is that, I mean, we've got the solar panels, and this is one I just took off my roof because it didn't work anymore. So this would be covered under there as photovoltaic. And later you're going to allow us to put it in the same container with electronic waste, which we'll call e-waste, even though there's no definition for it. Oh, wrong one.
Calculators?
So calculator, this typically goes in the e-waste pile.
Yes.
So,
it is still e-waste.
Right. It's still e-waste. Whether it's hazardous waste or not, that's a whole other issue that this perpetuates into here. Then I come to this one with an integrated panel. I can't understand, and I don't know how I'm going to explain to people that this can go as universal waste. This can go as universal waste. They can go in the same box, but I still have to treat this as hazardous. I think it's a major problem with these regulations, something like this. I've even got a little tiny one. So these I have to handle as a hazardous waste. And I see nothing in the statute that authorizes this, and even in the definitions that would explain, other than this part, why these won't be allowed as the universal waste also. I really encourage you to do that, because otherwise you're going to cause a lot of problems in the real world. The people I train in load checking at solid waste facilities to screen these things out have a hard enough time handling regular hazardous waste. Having them universal waste makes it a lot easier for them, and this is a major impediment to the success of this program, and we're having to do this. When I went to get this at the office supply store, half of the calculators there were solar. The other ones were really fancy ones. It was hard to find one that was just a simple calculator without a solar panel. So I encourage you to, and this is a comment that's been brought up before, and I think other people raised it, I really encourage you to include these as the universal waste rule.
Okay, yeah, thanks for your comment, and that's a great suggestion. We would appreciate it too if you can, I guess, officially submit that comment, so then we can take that into official consideration in the rulemaking process. Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah, while you're fast forwarding back there again, this is Doug Coble, California Product Stewardship Council. I want to echo what Larry just said, because we get calls on a regular basis from our funders, cities and counties up and down the state, asking that same question. What do I do with this solar light, this garden light? What do I do with this solar calculator? And it was pretty unfortunate that to see in number 8 of section 66273.7.1 B, that was excluded, because that doesn't answer the question here. Being part of the drafting of SB 489 back in the day, it was not the intent to isolate this just to solar panels that generate electricity off of rooftops and out of solar farms. It was to capture all of these, because this problem, as Larry has pointed out, is all the way through, the whole product chain. There should be no reason that these smaller devices should not also be included in these regulations, so that it answers the question once and for all.
Okay. Once again, thanks again for that continuing comment, and that is exactly the kind of problem areas that we want to identify from the community, so that when we finalize the regulation, it'll be, it'll be a good balance between what's needed and what's required for hazardous waste management as well. So I guess a lot of people are concerned with what are not covered as solar panel universal waste. So just before we get into what's not covered, I'll just rephrase that the ones that would be covered as solar panel waste would be, I'm sorry, did I miss a question right there?
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's just, I want to bring this up now because it's related to how we define what is within the scope of this regulation. And, you know, I've questioned, like, under photovoltaic module, what's the thinking around including ancillary components such as metal frames and boxes and some items that really should be managed as scrap metal, and in conjunction with some of the requirements around disassembly being considered a treatment that requires notification. Those two together put a lot of burden.
Sure.
And I think we should be trying to encourage the separation out of what is scrap metal as much as possible to make recycling easier and not have to go out of state.
That is exactly what our thoughts are behind, including all the other components that are made up the solar panels besides just the photovoltaic cells itself. We want you to recycle all the possible recyclable parts from that solar panel as a whole as much as possible, including scrap metals and batteries, junction boxes, whatever you could recycle. That is our aim, that at one point this would also provide us more recycling opportunities, that the community will look for recycle solutions to possibly recycle the whole solar panel. That's our aim. Hi.
Hi. So Christina asked a really good question about modules coming down off a roof and then going back onto a roof. And you gave an answer for that. But what about the secondary market? So modules that are coming off of a solar farm or off of a homeowner's roof or from a manufacturer that are then going to be resold on secondary PV market, which is just now being developed.
So those second-use solar panels are no longer a waste because they're not discarded as a waste anymore, because now they're going to be reused again. So that is now not a waste. Any questions before we get to what's not covered? All right, so those solar panels in this proposed regulations that are not covered as universal waste. The list is on the right-hand side in the table. It's a handful. I'm not going to read it all because I'm sure you all read it very thoroughly. But I'm just going to point out a couple of things as the gentleman right there was mentioning. So currently, the ones that's not covered would be something like the one that is integrated into other electronic devices, such as calculators. The reason that is that electronic devices are already managed as universal waste. So we don't want you to having to manage two universal wastes under two different requirements. So what is already managed as electronic devices, universal waste, would still be managed as electronic devices, universal waste. And another good one to point out would be something that doesn't have a hazardous characteristic of toxicity, then the waste is not a hazardous waste, and you can manage this as a non-hazardous waste. Any questions?
We have a couple questions.
Oh, from the...
The first one is more of just a quick comment from Kurt Berry, who just asked that speakers identify themselves before speaking. He's with the Inside Washington Publishers. So here's a question, though. It is from Angela Jean Levine with Troutman Sanders. With regard to the solar panel literature data that is available, in the data that DTSC has reviewed, are there some solar panels that are not passing California toxicity standards, but would pass federal RCRA standards? Put another way, are there some solar panels that would be required absent these universal waste standards to be managed as California hazardous?
So solar panels are tested, but pass the federal test, but doesn't pass California-specific test?
Yes, would pass federal, but not California. Would they be required to be managed as California hazardous, I guess, and not federal?
You can manage those waste as universal waste under current proposed regulation. But at this point, in the absence of regulation being finalized, then those wastes must be managed as California-specific hazardous waste.
And yeah, one more question from James Scruggs with San Diego Gas and Electric. It says, I am unable to find any solar panel recycling centers on the West Coast. I only found one in the US, Clean Lights in Ohio. If deemed as a universal waste requiring recycling, where can these be recycled? If the proposed universal waste rule is adopted and happens to be glass, will generators be required to separate the universal waste components from the glass prior to recycling/disposal?
Short answer is yes. We want you to recycle as much recyclable material from the photovoltaic modules as possible. So anything such as metal frame or junction boxes or other scrap metals, then we want you to recycle them. In terms of more recycle opportunities or not having enough recycle opportunities in California, the thought behind proposing this regulation is so that we're hoping that there will be more recycle opportunities and businesses happening because of this regulation, and that people will come up with a more inventive, more innovative way to recycle all parts possible from these solar panels.
Larry Sweetser again. A couple statements you made, totally agree with, but now I'm even more confused. Because you talked about the ancillary aspects of solar panels. There's wiring, metal frames, and all of that can be handled as the universal waste under these regs. Makes sense. I like that part. But you also said that we want to recycle as much as possible, and I agree with that. And that's why, again, on these, and that's why I had to go back to slide 7 that I didn't look at. I think these integrated ones fit in that definition of universal waste quite easily. And again, if these aren't included, you're going to make this whole process much harder on everyone involved.
Yep. Thanks again for the comment. That comment is noted twice, so I'll stick to it in my head.
Hi, I'm Christina with Recycle PV Solar LLC. We're in Lake Tahoe, Nevada, and the reason we're in Nevada is because of all the crazy laws in California. It's insane. So anybody who has any questions after this about recycling or processing, we can help you. We can talk to you about that.
Thanks for letting me know of your presence, and definitely I'll be in touch with you.
Sorry for so many questions. We have a lot of questions. In your fourth bullet down, destinations for recycling, those will not be covered under universal waste?
No, the way it is stated there, yeah, I can see why it could be confusing. But no, it is just not destiny for recycle, but destiny for recycle by being used in a manner constituting disposal. So let's say if a person decides, okay, I'm going to take this solar panel down my roof, and I'm going to recycle it and just leave it in the backyard for a certain amount of time, then we consider that is a waste, and that should be managed as a waste.
Hazard waste, or is it universal waste?
Again, that depends on the generator's determination of that waste.
This is the clarity that we have, that we work with daily. So having clarity in that is really, really important. And if the onus is always on the generator, it makes it really difficult to be able to do recycling within the state of California. It really needs to be clear. And it's not clear within the industry. There are installers that are around that don't understand the processes. They read through some of the documents, and it's not clear who the generator is and at what point it might become hazardous. So it is a big liability for our industry. So that clarity is really important, especially for companies that want to do recycling within the state. It ties our hands.
I agree.
For that particular criteria, keep in mind that the intent is if the recycling opportunity is for a product or a material that would be applied to ground, that would be used in a manner constituting disposal. So for example, I have the spent solar panel. In some way or form or fashion, I'm going to use it to make tiles that are going to be applied to landscaping. That is applied to the ground. What we're saying is that that is not a type of recycling that would be allowed when you talk about universal waste that are going for recycling. There are other regulations under Title 22 that preclude recycling by applying that spent material in a further process that is going to go to the ground. That's what that is for. Those are not activities that are covered under the universal waste. And that's not just for PV mods. Same would be true for any of the other universal waste.
Larry Sweetser again, and that is standard language I've seen in a lot, and it makes sense to a point, although I'm not sure the tile is the best example of that. It might be something like using it for alternative daily cover when it's ground, because there could be a use for tiles that are put on the ground, maybe indoors or protected from weather. You're worried about leaching, so. But we also have to be careful how far along you follow that one, because like most, particularly like other universal waste, it passes through multiple hands. And even though I'm intending for it to go to recycling, and I get a paper that says it's going to recycling, it's going to go through other people pulling off different materials. At some point, they may dispose of that in the land. And if I, as a generator, am on the hook for that initially, even though my intent and all of my documentation says it was sent for recycling, if it ends up in there, that's one of the hazards that we face, not only with these materials, but pretty much all hazardous waste, including universal.
Thanks for your comment again. Shall I move on? Okay. All right, so we're now in the definition sections of Chapter 23. So these definitions in terms of the same as the ones that are added to Chapter 10. Again, we want to make sure all these definitions are covered in both hazardous waste and universal waste management chapters. So universal waste handlers of solar panels are, first of all, prohibited from disposing of solar panel waste. Although handlers may not dispose of the solar panel waste themselves, they may send or take the solar panels for disposal at the destination facility. So we added this prohibition language to really make sure that solar panel waste are properly managed and disposed of, and that you just don't throw them in a trash bin, for example. Okay, so second prohibition language is added to that prohibit universal waste handlers from diluting or treating solar panels unless they're responding to, let's say, accidental breakage, or unless or except when they are conducting authorized treatments as specified under Chapter 23. So this second prohibition language is to make sure that universal waste handlers are conducting these authorized treatment and that they're not going out of what is specified under Chapter 23. That takes us to notification. Notification requirements. Requirements is for handlers that accept and accumulate solar panel waste. The notification needs to be 30 days before accepting the solar panel waste, and it has to be for each location, and the notification needs to be submitted in writing. So this notification requirement is no different than other existing notification requirements such as e-waste. And it is important for us that you notified us so that we are aware of who the players are, and we will understand what kind of handling activities are happening out there. And what to include in the notification is listed down below in the slide. And again, this list is the same as what is required in the e-waste notification.
We have a comment.
Larry Sweetser again. Understand the need for notification. There is going to be some major issues with this, especially on solid waste facilities. There's over 1,000 solid waste facilities in California, and who may or may not get some of these materials. Some of them already have. So since we don't know when we're going to get them or which types we're going to get, pretty much this would require every facility, 1,000 or so, to notify you ahead of time that they're going to be getting these materials, which essentially are illegal disposal. Also, some of the people I work with, public works departments and others, do roadside cleanups. They're going to find these on the side of the road. There's no way they can notify you prior to the acceptance of those materials. And also notifying the types. It's very difficult now to identify what types of solar modules exist. So having to break it down into all these categories for us is a really heavy burden to do that notification, especially when we don't know which ones we're going to get. So we'd have to notify we're going to take them all. And there's new technologies aren't even on your list. And so I don't know the benefit to us on our end for segregating out by type other than research on your end to know which ones they have. I think if that's the goal, that could be accomplished by the disposal sites when they go through the processing to notify the department of the types. So I don't see any need to notify types in the field.
Okay, because the types to include what type of solar panel waste it is in the notification is mainly for DTSC to understand, I guess, like what kind of solid waste solar panels are and what type they are that are being generated in the state of California. So that said, if it is extremely difficult to determine or differentiate what types they are, I guess I will have to come up with what to say for that kind of information. I don't have a straightforward answer to that right now.
Yeah, Larry, you understand the burden.
We appreciate that comment, and that would be a great comment. When we go to our formal rulemaking, perhaps that's something you can address to the department in writing in terms of a formal comment.
Oh, it's on my list.
Thank you.
I see more questions here. Okay.
Peter Beadle, Recycle PV Solar. I second his comment about the difficulty for, if you like, lay people to classify solar panels. And if you are asking handlers to do that,
then you should recognize that you can't put a definition in that they can work with. You're just going to get inaccurate data because they'll put down what they think you want. So
I understand that. That's again is a great comment, and that's exactly the kind of problem I want to hear that you might have.
Vincent Latham, working for the Sun Solar. It seemed like a simple fix to this one would be, why don't we have 30 to 45 days after we receive something to tell you what we received? It would give us the time to then kind of understand, let you know what we really have, not anticipate, because like this gentleman said, there's a lot of this stuff just floating around. It comes to those who are repurposing them. We have no idea. Someone will just call us on the phone and say, hey, we got 4 or 5 panels. We, that you're doing these repurposing projects. Oh, no, give me 30 days and let me tell somebody, but the house that we need to put it on is happening right now. Those kind of things for that stuff. And there's other questions have to do with, what if one gets broken? What if you have a whole bunch that you want to recycle or get to someone and they are all broken? And is there a place in here that's going to talk about the treatment of those, how a handler who in the course of an event is going to be handling some of those?
If the solar panel is broken by accident, then those broken panels need to be contained in a container, and they can still be treated as universal waste. So that's the question. That's the answer that I can give you right now. And I see your problem in terms of including type in the notification 30 days before you're even accepting the waste, because we're kind of having a wagon ahead of a horses kind of deal. So I get that, and that's a great comment. You good? Okay.
Chosu, we got an online question on this slide. It is from Carlos Chavez with Humboldt Waste Management Authority. He asks, do you intend to add PV to the materials checklist on the e-waste notification form checklist so that these notices can serve both purposes? When these regs say that handlers, and there's a second question. When these regs say the handlers must track and report PV units by type, are they referring to the chemical types listed in the PV definition, meaning that recycling centers should have to characterize each unit to that degree?
I guess the question is, can the notification be just one notification for both e-waste and solar panels? Can it be?
At this point, the requirements are separate because not all e-waste not all recyclers handle both materials. That is something we might consider, and I would encourage Humboldt County to submit that in writing and for consideration. Keep in mind that it is not our intent to be overly burdensome and require duplication. So we would appreciate that comment in the formal rulemaking. But at this point, they are different notifications for different purposes.
Is there a second part to the question? I think I missed that.
No, the second part again was, when these regs say that handlers must track and report PV units by type, are they referring to the chemical types listed in the definition?
So far, types would be such as whether they're thick film or thin film. So thin film solar panels versus they're made of, let's say, organic polymers, or whether they're made of silicon technology. That would be the type that we're referring to. Okay, I will move on to the next slide. So in addition to the notification requirements, universal waste handlers that generate more than 5,000 kilo of solar panel waste, or that accepts more than 100 kilo of solar panel waste, need to submit annual reporting requirement to DTSC. Reports need to be in writing, and the submission deadline is February 1. So this annual report requirement is also the same as existing universal waste, such as e-waste. And we set submission date deadline February 1 because that helps handlers complete and prepare the report and submit it on time.
Beetle again. I'd just like to point out that 100 kilograms of waste PV modules is probably less than 4 panels, 4 modules.
I did a rough calculations, 2 to 6, depending on the size. So it's not many. And appreciate you making it the same date as the other universal waste report. I encourage you, just like the notification, to be on the same document. I mean, it's really easy to not check certain boxes if you're not handling it. Same thing with the annual report that's submitted. Make it all one report. There's enough reports that jurisdictions and other folks have to fill out. To make another report just doesn't make sense to me. It would streamline it to make one report for all of that.
We'll definitely keep that in the consideration. Like Valadi said, we're not trying to put you any more burden than you already have. And that is why this information seminar is about, to really inform you what is in the proposed text right now. And based on all your comments and suggestions, we will take that into consideration and try to finalize this regulation as the best way we could.
Yeah, Jeff Brown with PV Recycle Solar. Yeah, so based on the last page and this page, you're going to get inundated. I mean, this is every solar contractor out there. Handles more than 4 panels,
Yeah.
I mean, every day, and that's the whole thing for 4 years now. I mean, every day, modules are ending up in dumpsters and ending up in landfills, and nothing's been enforced. So that's the whole thing. I mean, nothing has been enforced. So that's what we're asking. If this is 4 modules, basically they're 45 pounds apiece. You're going to get inundated. Basically, are we going to go as a state to every solar contractor and put them on your list? That was my question.
So I guess, universal waste handler definition is for both the generators of the waste as well as for those who accept and accumulates, right? So I guess the point of this parameters is to really make sure that anybody that handles universal waste need to submit an annual report. That is the main point of it. And the point here really is to make sure that we know where these solar panel wastes are going and that they're not ending up in solid waste landfills unless they are determined to be non-hazardous, and that we keep track of how these wastes are being managed as universal waste. So I guess the point is, as soon as you're handling solar panel waste, then you're probably going to need to notify us and also do annual report.
Kristen DeLallo again from SEER. So I have 4 spent solar panels at my house, and SunPower is coming to pick those up when the new ones come in. And they're off the ground. They had already taken them off. They left them in my backyard. So they have to, because there's 4, they have to submit notification to you as a handler when they're taking those back to wherever they're going to go right now, if I'm understanding correctly.
So they would be over 100 kilos?
For sure.
Oh.
My solar panels are about 45 pounds each at my home. I mean, that's what you're saying, right?
So I think at that point, okay, yeah, sure.
So I didn't want to jump into these discussions, but so if it's hazardous, so solar panels, if they're not hazardous, they're not hazardous. But if it has hazardous waste, the limit was for 100 kg, is make sure that you're not disposing hazardous waste to anywhere you want to. So that's why the requirement, we left at 100 kg. These regulations will facilitate recycling of this material. So the intent is, right now you have to manage it as hazardous waste if it has like constituents in it. So the state of California would suggest that these regulations will facilitate recycling of this waste. So that way you're not just taking it to
But wouldn't they be
landfill.
considered a handler if they're taking them away from my home?
I'm sorry.
They would be considered a handler if they're taking them away
Yes.
from my home?
Yes.
Okay.
So the 100 kilograms, right now, when a business is trying to determine whether they qualify, and they have to count up their material, especially if they're coming in to use our household hazardous waste program as a conditional exempt small quantity generator, we don't have to include universal waste. But this is just a requirement for them to report that they are generating, not necessarily, it doesn't count toward their accumulation quantity, correct? I'll put it
Can
in
you
writing.
repeat the question again? It's between the generator
right now,
and the
in-house hazardous
handler?
waste programs can accept from conditionally exempt small quantity generators, which are limited to 100 kilograms per month, per calendar month. We don't have to include universal waste as of some legislation a number of years ago. So in that acceptance of that, we don't have to include, we can still accept essentially unlimited amounts of these materials at our facility. This is just a requirement for the generator to notify the department.
Larry,
It
that is
doesn't impact
correct. That's correct. Thank you.
There we go. Okay, more questions?
I just wanted to squeeze this in here. Did you know that most recyclers that claim to recycle solar panels, they actually just peel the aluminum off and the rest of the glass and stuff ends up in the landfill? That's really true. And the only reason I know that is because I'm so passionate about keeping solar panels out of the landfill, period.
At least in California right now, the only part that you may be able to recycle are, for example, scrap metals and other, metal parts. I agree. Unless you're somewhere in Europe, then they can. They also have technologies to recycle solar panel mirrors, right? So that said, we'll get into that in the later in this presentation. That once a handler treats the solar panel by, for example, disassembling the panel, like taking the metal frame out of the solar panel, then after that, if a handler decides that if you're not going to treat the waste further, then the leftover part of the solar panel needs to be either recycled or disposed of. And if you decide to dispose of at that point, then that waste becomes hazardous waste, and the generators are required to meet all the full hazardous waste generator requirements at that point, and the waste need to be disposed of as hazardous waste. But we definitely don't want to end up in solid waste landfills.
Doug Coble, California Product Stewardship Council. I think Larry might have answered my question just a minute ago, but I want to make sure as I'm parlaying off of Kristen's question, which is, so if you have a self cleanup company come in, not SunPower like she's going to have, who is probably going to be registered with you guys, is probably going to be reporting to you guys already. But if you have a cleanup company that comes in and cleans out your backyard and picks up her 4 solar panels as well, do they have to report to you? Because now you're talking about thousands and thousands of cleanup companies across the state that are these ma and pa type of cleanup companies. Is that your intent, or is your intent really just to make sure they end up in the right place where they're being recycled?
If the cleanup company is merely just transporting the solar panel waste, then they are qualified as a universal waste transporter at that point if the waste is going to be treated as universal waste. But I guess those transporters, if they also handle the waste, then they're also universal waste handlers. So then they need to meet they need to comply with all the requirements in Chapter 23. Yes. All right, I'll move on to the rest of the slides. Oh, one more.
Actually, in between where you move on to, you don't have a slide for G on electronic submissions. And the only thing is there, I just want to say thanks for allowing written forms, because some of my rural counties have spotty, some of them don't even have any internet access. And so having the written format helps. So I just want to say thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that electronic submission is mainly for e-waste. So yeah, so I guess that phrase in the reg text right now is kind of bootlegging our proposal for universal solar panels. Okay, I will move on. So we added a new section specifically for universal waste management, universal waste handlers of solar panels. So these are the requirements that universal waste solar panel handlers need to comply with. Although this is a new section, this section mirrors existing universal waste such as e-waste and CRT. So requirements are such that I'm not going to read the entire list, such as they need to notify and do annual report, they need to properly label the waste, they have a certain accumulation time, facilities need to have personal training, and as well as they can only perform authorized treatment as specified in this chapter. We also, on that last slide.
Doug Coble, California Product Stewardship Council. On that last slide, in reading the text under Part A, 2A, where it describes the universal waste hauler handler shall contain the PV modules in a manner to prevent breakage. So you're talking about the waste the handler has to prevent breakage, but later, if they're treating, the same handler can break the glass. So I have two questions. One, what is the problem? What's the concern about the glass? I understand with CRT glass, with the lead and the potential release, that was clear when those regulations were drafted. For the glass in these solar panels, what is the concern? What kind of imminent danger or health risks are being put out there for when it's broken? Because now you got to treat it as hazardous waste, not as a universal waste any longer. And then how it's a little confusing when you're talking about somebody who's just transporting or who's just moving around or sending it to another place, they can't break it. But then once you get it to a place where there's a treatment permit, they can break it. And it's just, you're using the same term for multiple different processes. It almost makes more sense that there's a universal waste collector, there's a universal waste transporter, which there already is one defined, there's a universal waste processor. And so maybe the collector has to avoid the breakage, but the processor is allowed to do it under the treatment.
So,
sure.
Really, it's good housekeeping. So you don't want to have an installer or just throwing that PV modules right on the ground where it shatters all over the place. Then you have to do, it's housekeeping. That person that manages it, it's a facility, so they are a controlled environment. It isn't something that somebody just throws it back of the truck and not have any packaging around it, so it could fall off. You could be actually illegally disposing of it. So it's housekeeping. That's the intent of that law, that requirement.
Jeff Brown with Recycle PV, and based on what Doug, right? What Doug just said. So what I'm hearing is if we what we call process a module. I could set up shop from Fresno, Clovis area. I could set up shop tomorrow where I can dismantle a solar module and not break the glass, and I'm in compliance.
So your process is a little different from what we process. So
what I'm saying is, for instance,
yeah.
If I have a machine that could separate the glass from the module, from the solar cells,
that would be a dismantling treatment, yes.
I'm not, right, but I haven't broke the glass. See, I'm looking at the language, right? So I haven't broke the glass.
You haven't,
and I won't break the glass until it goes, and that would be recycled somewhere else. So I got my aluminum and all that. And then the rest of it is processed somewhere else, maybe out of state.
Yes.
But yeah, so, but most of the modules are here, so we want to process them here. So, but that's the question. If everything's about this broken glass, and that was a great question from Doug, is it comes down to the broken glass.
I'll get into, sorry.
Again, for clarification, what we're trying to differentiate is we have notification that for the person who's going to be the first point of contact, what we're requiring is that as the first point of contact, good housekeeping would say, as I take them off the home, as I put them on the truck, as I get them to the entity that will do further dismantling or further processing, they are managed in a way that is safe, that prevents breakage, so that we don't inadvertently cause a release to the environment. Once you are at the point of dismantling or processing, there is a notification requirement, and you would be we have a self-implementing authorization for that and some criteria that must be met. But we want to ensure that from start to finish, safe activities occur. So we don't want throwing it down, catch, maybe toss it in the truck, and now you're going to release. So the avoid breakage is to ensure that in the process of managing the materials, we provide opportunities that ensure safe management, and avoid releases to the environment. So intentional breaking is part of the processing, but not part of the collecting for the purposes of getting to someone who is then going to be authorized to process. Think about it in that way.
Hi, I'm Christina again with Recycle PV Solar. With the mono and polycrystalline solar panels, which are not toxic. Okay, sometimes they do get broken, and it's a safety glass on the top. And it is so easy. We have a process where we recoat that glass, reseal that glass, put it right back up there on the roof or in the sun. It keeps working. So there's no reason to throw that away or recycle it. Just put it back together and put it back on the roof. It's fine. Now, when you're dealing with the thin film, there's a different kind of glass on there. So it's a different animal altogether. You really have to separate. What we see commonly on most houses is the poly or the monocrystalline solar panels, not so much the thin film. You do have them, but they are really a different animal, and they should be treated differently than the common ones that most people have on their houses.
Sounds like you're proposing different treatments depending on the type of solar panels. So I guess that's a great comment, and I suggest you put that in the public comments also so we can consider it. Okay.
It's like a horse is transportation and a truck is transportation. They both get you there, but they're different.
Just takes a little longer with the horse, right?
Hi, this is Evelyn Butler from the Solar Energy Industries Association. Just a couple of things I want to point out. In terms of the protection of the module packaging, that's not a typical supply that an installer will carry around on his truck because his purpose is to install the module, right? So if you have the typical types of trucks that installers are using today, they don't really have room for additional packaging in case of breakage. And in some cases, you may find that you're making the entire expense of potential protection very expensive to that installer. The way that these modules come from the factories to either distribution center or to the installer's staging area is completely different. They're not individually packaged. They're not like IKEA, where you have a module in a box. So I think that's somewhat wasteful to the environment to require that. And also, if you're talking about personnel training, meaning that you want to train everybody who's on site at an installation in order to be a qualified universal handler, there are over 76,000 solar employees in California. So that's another, I think, consequence of these regulations that you might need to take into consideration.
Sure, thanks for the comment, Evelyn. In terms of packaging, we're not, to prevent releases, we're not talking about put it back in the way, I guess, the brand new solar panel came in that kind of package form. We're saying that if solar panel is broken by accident, then make sure that these broken parts are picked up and contained so that they won't release to the environment. Let's say heavy metals residues wouldn't be on the ground and eventually get into water or things like that. So the point is to make sure to clean up the area sufficiently and immediately to prevent any releases to the environment. So that packaging is, let's say it could be a plastic bin to contain broken solar panels. Sure.
And Larry Sweetser again, and if I read it right under A3, I think I appreciate the fact that immediately clean up and contain anything that's accidentally or unintentionally broken and handle it as the universal waste rule. Now the trick question part of it is, especially on the solid waste side, some people will hide things in a container. So if I've got a garbage truck coming along, picking it up, putting it in the back and compacting it, or if it's hidden in a load at a landfill and a bulldozer runs over it without seeing it, I assume that still meets the definition of unintentional and accidental, because we didn't know it was there, we didn't see it at the time. And we could, if we do identify it, the pieces, then we can manage it as the universal waste. I know, good writing.
you going to answer that, or sorry? Okay.
Hi, Sam Vanderhoof again from Solar Cowboys. I think there's some misconception about what broken solar panels really mean. I've been doing this for 40 years, so I've seen a lot of different types of solar panels. I've manufactured solar panels. Solar panels, when they break, it's not like breaking a mirror or a piece of glass. These are tempered glass, and they're sandwiched between plastics, sometimes glass again. They don't leach anything out. It's very difficult to have them scatter in pieces. It's not like a broken piece of glass. It's encapsulated already. There's nothing that can really fall off unless, I mean, it's possible, but really difficult to have them break in pieces. Single crystal, multi-crystal modules, because they're tempered glass. Going back to thin film technologies, the stuff you buy at Harbor Freight, a couple of the companies manufacture these big power plants. It's not possible to manufacture that technology with tempered glass. Just the technology doesn't allow it. So when they do break in pieces. So it is a big disparity, I mean, what we're talking about. And these other technologies, thin film technologies, are only about 5% of it and all the stuff we're dealing with. So what's happened is it looks like that all solar modules have been classified under this possibility of being hazardous material when it's not the case. And this is when we've been on this process now for 5 years maybe. So being able to deal with it now is really important. Just deal with the hazmat or not. And standard modules do not fall to pieces when they're crushed.
We appreciate that, and admittedly, we have not worked with every manufacturer in the world on the different types of PV mods that existed from its inception 30, 40, 50 years ago. Our intent at this point is to get a base universal program in place for PV mods that meet the criteria for the regulations. We do understand and appreciate that there are a vast array of types of materials. Personally, doing the regulations as part of the first e-waste program for the universal waste electronic device, I received many, many comments about the thousands and thousands of types of electronic devices that could exist and with these regulations apply to them. And the answer is, if someone understands that they fail based on testing and or if they choose to manage it under this program and forego the testing, these regulations provide options. Keep in mind that we do appreciate there are new technologies out there today. We do want to have a program in place to allow reduced standards for those devices that are now reaching the end of life that 40 years ago when they were first developed may or may not contain levels of metals, for example, that exceed regulatory thresholds. So I'm going to ask that you be patient with us. I'm going to ask Chosu to finish the presentation to go through the base regulations that we are proposing to add PV mods under the universal waste criteria. Also, the statute allows that we have authority to do ongoing regulations package. So what that means and what we would appreciate from you is that once we have a base program in place to allow recycling under the universal waste for PV mods that fit the category for the regulations, we can still do additional regulation packages to fine-tune, narrow, broad, whatever we understand is needed. But in consideration for the many years we're working to get a program in place, we have to start somewhere. So with that, if we can go through some more of the regulatory text with appreciation for all of the comments, I don't want you to lose sight of the comments, and I would encourage you when we go to full rulemaking to include those comments to us for our consideration. And that way we can address some of the more specific needs, at the same time push forward to get a base program, an initial program in place. Because right now, if we don't have a universal waste program for PV mods, and if it is identified that the materials exceeds for both federal or state toxicity criteria, they must be managed as a hazardous waste, and any person who is managing them, transporting them, storing them, accumulating them, they are required to follow all of the generator requirements, all the transporter requirements, all of the recycling and treatment and disposal requirements. So this, again, if you think about at least this initial phase that we're undergoing, for those that meet the criteria, we have a starting point to be continued on and on and on.
It's a bit frustrating. We've been waiting for 5 years to have some movement on this, and it hasn't happened. So the industry, the solar industry, especially in California, is at a standpoint that's stalled right now.
And you'll see at the end of the presentation with our timeline, our intent is to notice in 2 short weeks-ish, or within a month.
Many of us are worried also that we rush ahead and make some changes, but it may be a little restrictive and not make it move forward in the right way. I have a question, though. Have you guys worked with any professionals outside the DTSC? Have you worked with the CEC or anything that look at what the makeup is of solar modules and what the percentages are? There's really great reports from the CEC. I mean, they have the information. Or RMI out of Colorado. These guys know how to do this stuff. They know what's in these modules. They've done some testing themselves.
And again,
reports on it.
If the modules don't exceed any regulatory threshold, there's no issue. So, and that's great because manufacturers know what's in their what materials are in their solar panels. So if I am going to have solar panels installed in my home and I'm concerned, I can work with the manufacturers to say, hey, what's in these panels? And I can choose to have them on my home. And then I can choose if I know they may contain some constituent that may fail, or if I do literature research, if that's the case, then I have options on how they could be managed once they are off my home or off my business. Again, it's about, we as a department won't know everything about what's in them. Manufacturers will, though, but we will work really hard with those who participate in our work groups. We can work with the manufacturing groups. And I would encourage industry to work with the manufacturers and get us the data. And we can consider that, help us do our job more efficiently by providing that data to us, and also by providing the comments when we go to full rulemaking.
And I do want to address your concern that we're going to rush into something and it's not going to be tailored to exactly what's happening in the landscape of solar right now. Part of it is when we go to the formal rulemaking process, is we have to respond to all of your comments. We have to take into consideration the impacts that your comments would have on this final rulemaking. So I know we keep saying this, but we do strongly encourage you to provide us comments in writing once we public notice these so that they can be the best fit for this industry.
All right, that said, I'll move on to the next slide about labeling and marking. There's a question. 2 or 3.
Doug Coble, California Product Stewardship Council. Just a quick, no, back onto the labeling. Sorry, no, there you go. Thank you. Under this requirement, can you also require that they report or show what type of panel it is? Is it a film type? Is it crystalline? So it's quickly and easily identified by whoever receives it. It's a simple add to your label.
Well, let's say if I'm a manager managing the handling facility, I would want to know everything about the waste that I'm managing as much as possible. So something like that, I would try to include it for my employees, but that's not a definite requirement. What we really want in terms of labeling and marking is so that you can identify what ways you are handling and managing at your facility, and you can easily identify that waste. And what I have given on the as a sample is just purely an example of how the labeling could be. And we are proposing how solar panel waste should be labeled as universal waste PV modules. So, all we want to make sure is that you know where your waste is. And also, the most important thing for labeling and marking is to include the accumulation date. And that's important because universal waste handlers can accumulate the waste up to a year. And if it exceeds a year, then they need a full hazardous, they need a hazardous waste storage permit to keep storing the waste.
Larry Sweetser again, and appreciate being able to put the PV modules into the same container as the electronics and CRTs and CRT. Is there anything we can do, well, not only for that, but also the demarked area? That's been really helpful to have that ability in facilities where you're getting a lot of material and trying to keep track of dates. Is there anything we can do about shortening the name? I mean, we've got universal waste dash electronic devices with an S in parentheses, universal waste dash CRTs with another S, universal waste CRT glass, universal waste PV module. Is there some way we can shorten that? It would make a lot easier to do that. It's just one more long label to put in there. And another common reality that happens is a lot of times microwaves are put into that same area because they're thought of as e-waste, even though that's not defined, even though they're excluded from the definition of electronic devices. So maybe just a shorter term for that. And
sure,
I agree with, oh, go ahead.
That's a great suggestion too, and I definitely recommend to put that in the comment in writing too, yes.
And also with Doug had mentioned, I mean, it would make it a lot easier for us out in the field to identify if the manufacturers were required to label what type of unit it is. I'd prefer not to track that at all, but I've looked at a few that have come in and I can't find any sort of label. I look online, I look safety data sheets, I still can't find the chemistry on some of these on the product specs. So.
And I will make a comment on that. We don't regulate the manufacturers, so I don't know that we have authority to tell a manufacturer how to label their products. So part of what we do have in terms of the requirements is based on what a handler will be able to do. So think through, or as you consider the comment, the ability for a person who's just managing the material, whether that is information that would be available to them, that would be part of the consideration. But please provide your comments to us during the rulemaking process.
And under this part you don't, but under the Safer Consumer Products might be an ability there, or in the Energy Commission when they're requiring them. It's just to try and identify which type of chemistry it is out in the field, especially if you only have pieces, is not possible.
I'm going to keep this seminar rolling because we have probably about like 15.5 minutes. And I want to make sure that, webcast doesn't get, doesn't cut us off like at 11 o'clock. So, because we're still at like Article 3 and we have a lot more in terms of like Article 7s and closure plans and all that. Is that okay? All right, I'm going to continue then. We probably covered this also. So universal waste handlers need to keep records of their activities at their handling facilities. So record keeping could be in a form of log, invoices, bill of lading, manifest, anything that you can possibly do to keep records of. And we are proposing to have name and address of the sender receivers of the solar panel waste, the amount of the waste, and also accumulation or like the receipt or departure date of the solar panels. And this record keeping is mainly for you to know what your record is for the year so that you can use that in your annual report and notification, etc.
Larry, I'm going to ask if you hold your questions until Tracy gets through the rest of the presentation.
Right now, I'm panicking a little bit. We're still on Article 5, and we still have quite a few more slides to go for like the next 15 minutes. So yeah, thank you for your time, and I'll answer more questions after the presentation. Okay. So now we're on to requirements for universal waste transporters. Universal waste transporters of solar panels have the same requirements as other universal waste, such as e-waste and CRTs and other universal waste. So they need to comply with DOT requirements. They need to comply with storage time limit during transportation. They also need to manage the waste to prevent any releases, such as they need to clean up if there is an accidental breakage, etc. And they also need to make sure that they are not treating or diluting the universal waste during transportation. So that language is really to make sure that the universal waste is not, treated outside of what is specified in Chapter 23. And, but for this transporter term, the term that is specific for solar panel waste is that transporters are prohibited from transporting more than 100 kilo of solar panels unless they are contained. So this containment language is there really to make sure that you are transporting solar panels by not breaking them, and that if there could be some sort of breakage in the horizon, and that you have measures in place to contain them, to prevent any releases to the environment. And this 100 kilo language also allows those transporters that are only transporting maybe 1 or 2 solar panels to be able to transport those panels without needing that container requirements. Okay, so that finally takes us to Article 7. Article 7 is all about authorized treatments under Chapter 23. These authorized treatments are for universal waste handlers that treat universal waste PV modules to be allowed to do under Chapter 23. There are varying levels of treatment activities we propose for solar panels. Just for the ease of following the presentation, I am labeling them as level 1, 2, and 3 for removal activities, dismantling activities, and treatment processing activities, respectively. Again, these treatments are self-authorized treatment activities. What it means is that DTSC does not grant authorization for universal waste handlers to conduct these activities as long as you comply with the requirements in Chapter 23. Okay, so we'll start with the first level of treatment activities, which is removal activities. So this is simply removing components such as batteries or inverters from the solar panel as a whole, and or removing components as replacement parts that would normally be prescribed in the, or like described in the operation manual. So that would be removal activities that handlers are authorized to perform as the lowest level of treatment. Those removal activities, handlers are exempt from certain treatment requirements, such as notification and reporting requirements, and closure plans and closure activities requirements. So the next level, the second level of treatment activity is dismantling, draining activities. So for a solar panel, the treatment of concern is dismantling. Example would be something like removing metal frame around the solar panel. That would be considered dismantling activities. So this requirement applies to handlers that dismantle, remove, segregate components, as long as they do not break the glass. And after the dismantling activities, make sure you recycle all their recyclable parts, and that they also need to comply with notification, reporting, record keeping requirements specific to this treatment activities. Shall I continue? Okay. So those handlers that perform level 2 dismantling activities need to protect the person managing the activities. What it means is that facility handlers inform, their employees that perform those activities of the hazards that of those activities, which you would normally do anyway. And that facilities have proper safety measures, such as they have proper fire safety routes, etc. and that handlers also need to prevent any releases to the environment by performing these activities, such as make sure that dismantling activity is performed in a designated area, and that you clean up the area immediately after the activity, and that you clean up just in case and contain residuals in case of accidental breakage. At this point, after the dismantling activity, if you can either stop here or you can do further treatments, the next level of treatment. So if you do stop here and do not continue with the next level of treatment, then handler at this point need to either recycle or dispose of the solar panel waste at a disposal facility. So if you decide to dispose of the waste, at this point, the waste becomes a hazardous waste, and the waste needs to be disposed of as hazardous waste, and generators need to comply with all their hazardous waste generator requirements. It is either that, or you can also continue on to the next, the third level of treatment. So this is what I consider level 3 treatment activities. So these activities are such as you intentionally break the solar panel. So these are the certain physical processing activities that we allow because we consider these activities as low risk without needing a hazardous waste facility permit. So at this level, treatments allowed are, like I said, you can intentionally break the solar panel, or removal dismantle activities that I mentioned in the previous slides, or physical treatments such as cutting, shredding, grinding solar panels, as well as physical separation, such as by separating the panel by either density or color, etc. We also added under this level 3 section activities that are not allowed as authorized treatment under Chapter 23. So these treatment activities are those that use either chemicals or heat. We're not saying that you cannot do these treatment. You can, just that not under Chapter 23. So if you do decide to use either chemicals, including water or heat, then you will require to have a hazardous waste facility permit to conduct those treatments. Otherwise, they're not allowed under Chapter 23. As for disassembling level 2 activities, those handlers that perform level 3 certain processing activities need to comply with notification, reporting, record-keeping requirements, and also safety measures. In addition to those requirements, these treatment activities, handlers that do these treatment activities also need to comply with having a closure plan and financial assurance requirements. And at this point, once again, if after this treatment, if you decide to get rid of the waste, then the waste needs to be at a disposal facility, hazardous waste disposal facility, and needs to be managed as hazardous waste. And handler at this point becomes hazardous waste generators and need to meet all the hazardous waste generator requirements. There are also notification and annual reporting requirements. I will get into this very, very quickly. So notification requirement applies to authorized treatment activities and for disposal facilities. So I'm going to combine the two slides together. So notification is for authorized treatment and for disposal facilities. So these notification requirements for universal waste handlers that treat solar panel waste are the same as other universal waste, such as electronic waste. Notification needs to be submitted in writing, and it needs to be 30 days before the treatment of the solar panels. And what to include in the notification requirement for both authorized treatment and for disposal are listed down below. And again, that list is the same as that's for other universal waste. Very quickly again, this is annual reporting requirement require for handler that dismantle or process solar panels. So this means level 2 and level 3 treatment activities. Annual report submission is once again February 1, the same date as e-waste annual report requirement, and that's to allow you to, that's to give you plenty of time to prepare and submit the report on time. And what's to include in the report is also the same as that for e-waste. There are also record-keeping activities requirement for those handlers. Record-keeping could be in a form of notification, most recent annual report, or other relevant permits such as land use permit, etc. They need to be delivered on site, and this is really mainly for verifying purpose. Like I mentioned, there are 3 levels of activities, and this under 0.75 section only lists the standards and requirements for level 3 processing activities. These activities are also described in the other relevant sections, but we compile a list here so that handlers that are performing this level 3 processing activities would know exactly what the list that they need to check off from to meet all the requirements. So such as do only the authorized treatment, don't accept any hazardous waste solar panels. If there is a breakage, contains it, or like after treating, clean up immediately, and also have local zoning requirements and worker safety requirements. All right, so this is the most difference part for handlers that perform level 3 processing activities. In addition to all the notification and annual reporting requirements, these handlers that do level 3 activities need to have a closure plan and cost estimate for closure in the event that the handling facility closes. So what this demonstrates is that handlers are prepared and that they have thought through all the activities that they will be doing at their facility, and that they have budgeted in advance for certain closure activities, such as decontaminating the facility, all the equipment. And this notification needs to be submitted to DTSC 30 days before the closure activity, and it needs to be part of the notification for treatment. In the event that handler decides to close down the facility, the treatment facility, then that handler also needs to notify to DTSC of the facility closure notification. So the notifications for closure needs to be submitted 30 calendar days of the last treatment activities, and what to include in the closure notification is listed down there. Oh, any questions up to this point? Okay, I'll get into the project timeline right now. So this is the timeline that we're projecting for this rulemaking. We're now at the information seminar in late March. Shortly after, in maybe the next week or two, we will submit the regulation package to Office of Administrative Law to public notice. So once when public notice is when the official comment period begins. And roughly close to 2 months after the official comment period, we will have a public hearing section. And depending on what's needed, we may have additional comment period. And after that, we will begin the process of finalizing this regulation package. If you have any technical questions or any questions at all, I suggest that you call me. My contact information is in the next slide. And I also encourage you to sign up on our email list so that if there are any questions about or like any updates with this rulemaking, then you will get the notification via email. So that said, my contact information is on this slide. Please, once again, feel free to call me anytime with any questions you have. And I'll try to answer you my best. And I also provide you on this slide all these web links. The first 2 web links take you to current regulation rulemaking, and you can get updates from those web links. And the last link is where you can click to sign up for to be on our email list. All right, thank you very much for your time. Are there any questions that I can answer?
This is back to the, Larry Sweetser again, to the tracking of the universal waste shipments. You've repeated the part about tracking the receipt of shipments. For the life of me, I can't understand the justification for that, even on the existing universal waste where we have to track individually items coming in by individual persons for that. It would be nice to get this removed. I mean, this is a far more stringent requirement than we have on other hazardous wastes. If we get pesticides in, we get oxidizers in, we get water reactives, we don't have to track the incoming. So why would we have to track the incoming material individually by person and amounts of material, not only for the solar panels and photovoltaics, but also all the other universal waste? It's a real burdensome. A couple of facilities I work with, 6 of them got violations last year for not doing this. I can't explain to them what purpose it actually serves to track the incoming material when we're already tracking the storage, we're tracking the amount of material that we send out. It just seems like an excessive burden.
Yeah, the point of that is to for us to know how much, I guess, waste you have at your handling facility. So this is just mainly to make sure you're doing the math in terms of what's coming in versus what is going out, and know what the total amount is at the facility, right? So then that helps with the annual report, and also that allows you to determine if you can accept or if you have room to accept more waste as needed.
And then
Know
Larry,
all of that without keeping it in tracking log. When we do reporting for business plans or other things, we can report that information anyway. We know how much physical room we have to store. It serves no useful purpose to track that incoming material for people and be subject to violations for not getting a name and address or the amount of material.
so Larry, for the other universal waste, that's out of the scope of this reg package, but I will say that for the purpose of the California Electronic Waste Program that offers reimbursement, there are other regulatory and statutory requirements that may be a consideration. So for this new waste streams, there's a lot of data gaps that we seek to fill with the regulations and the requirements for the PV mod. So as you comment, for the purpose of the PV mod package, we appreciate your comments to be limited to the scope of what we are proposing for the PV mods.
Well, this is in there. It is something that can be changed at this point for these materials at least.
Thank you, and we appreciate if you provide that comment to us during the rulemaking.
And in addition, under the other materials that we have the ability to track generically. We don't have to track each individual person and address. We're allowed to aggregate that as a household generator or others. That ability is not in this part of it.
Thank you.
This is Evelyn Butler from the Solar Energy Industries Association. So I just want to clarify, the package of proposed regulations that will be released for public notice is what we've received today. There will be no further changes in the proposed regulations, or do you anticipate to change them after today and before you public notice them?
Jessica, do you want to answer that?
Correct. We're not going to change it after today. This is more of an informational seminar so that we can discuss and we can answer your questions, just because we know there's some newer players, newer stakeholders. But this is the text we plan on public noticing.
Yeah, our hope is that this information seminar will give you kind of a ground for where we are and why we propose the text the way it is. And I'm already hearing a lot of comments, and I appreciate all those comments. And throughout this process, put them in the public comments, and then so we can officially and properly address each comment.
Hi, this is Victoria Oster with Tesla. Going back to the definition of the photovoltaic module, including the frames and other metal components, I do see in the regulation that when you get to the disassembly that there's some mention of scrap metal, but it's really not clear that scrap metal separated out from the photocells and other electronic waste, comes out of this regulation and becomes exempt. So that's something to consider. And then the other comment is just again related to the threshold for notification reporting, given that we're considering the entire module and its ancillary equipment part of the photovoltaic. Was there some thought around like focusing this regulation on the actual photovoltaic cells and then recognizing the electronic components are then regulated as electronic waste, that could be managed as universal waste, and then there's these other pieces of being scrap metal? I guess the question is really around scrap metal, is what consideration was given to encouraging recycling. We're still encouraging recycling, but also recognizing there are components that really should be categorized as scrap metal.
I'm not sure there was a question in there. Can you?
Oh, yeah. So what consideration was given in the history of developing this regulation to, why include components in these modules? So, calling the entire, module pulling that into this regulation, recognizing there are components that are already regulated possibly as electronics waste and then also as scrap metal.
So there's no duplication. If you have an electronic device, it can be managed under those universal waste standards for electronic devices. For the purpose of the PV panels, for those that one chooses to manage it as a PV panel as opposed to an electronic device, you have options there. So does that answer your question? Unless I'm not sure.
I think also the intent was that we didn't want to make it overly complicated by saying, now this is the thin film this is the actual panel and here's all these other parts. We wanted to just capture it as one category. So when you remove the entire piece from, say, a rooftop, you're not having to discern, okay, how are we going to manage this part? And we have to deal with this all right now, when all we're doing is really uninstalling something. It was the intent was to streamline it so that it's just one category. This whole thing will be captured as a PV module, even if parts of it could be categorized as scrap metal or e-waste.
Yeah, I think essentially the idea was you identify as PV module the unit that is commonly being managed as a whole. Because then as you begin to disassemble, then all the different components then kind of fall into their own categories of waste and waste management. Scrap metal isn't identified or dealt with specifically in this regulation because it's dealt with in other parts of the regulation. So this regulation is intended to dovetail with the rest of the hazardous waste management requirements. So this is essentially, if it's scrap metal, it already enjoys its own specific exclusion from the hazardous waste management requirements. So therefore, we didn't need to duplicate that within this. We just rely heavily on the rest of our regulatory system.
I'll just say maybe it's more of a comment that it's not clear the way the reg's written currently that those pieces come up. Once you've disassembled, then you're out of this regulation. I think some of the other universal waste regs, you talk about like residuals coming, from releases. There's clarity around what you do with those separated out pieces. And that would be perhaps more in the realm of a comment. And then also a comment around, because you're calling the entire apparatus associated with the cells, the module, then the thresholds are way too low. I think, again, a regulatory burden for a lot of the process.
Okay, thank you. I saw your hand.
Doug Coble, California Product Stewardship Council. Real quick, just process question. So I heard you say that you're not going to make any changes to the regs we've seen in front of us today until you've introduced them as into the formal rulemaking process. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so we should hold our comments till we see you introduce the formal rules.
Yes, when we public notice by OAL, so that's when the official comment period begins. So like all these comments and questions and discussions that we talk about could be in the official comment section. So you can submit the comments by writing.
Okay, so you're not going to make any adjustments to what we talked about today. There's some clear things that you guys even agreed to that probably should be changed, but you're not going to make those changes, so we'll have to comment anyway.
Correct.
Okay.
Just a quick clarifying point. This is Eric with Good Son. So we're a 501c3 nonprofit. We take in used mods and then repurpose them. So that's what this is in reference to. On the notification slide, you say, for handlers who accept and accumulate PV modules, should that say PV waste modules, or is that for all handlers?
At this point, under Chapter 23, we're, I guess, generalizing that all the solar panel waste are universal waste solar panels.
Yeah, so under applicability, it explains that it's really only those panels that are wastes. If it's not a waste yet, if it's still product, it can be refurbished, but that wouldn't fall into this.
Oh, a couple questions. I'll try. So when we're talking about this, I keep going back to the broken glass. Are you considering broken glass a non-usable wasted panel?
Sorry, can you say that again?
A broken glass solar panel. Even if it can be fixed, is it still considered universal under the new proposal or not?
Well, let's say if a solar panel broke by accident during treating it as a waste, then at that point, the panel is considered a waste, right? If you discard it. But if you take the broken solar panel for the purpose of fixing it and putting it back up on the, let's say, a rooftop again, the solar panel at that point is no longer a waste, so it doesn't meet what you need to do under Chapter 23.
Even though it's broken glass?
Yes.
I just want to clarify. Okay, a couple other small things. What about sending solar panels out of the state of California for processing someplace else?
So since once California becomes authorized, they would be, for its universal waste program, and once these regs are in effect, they would be universal waste in California only. So once they cross state lines, if there is knowledge that they are RCRA hazardous waste, they would need to be managed as a RCRA hazardous waste. So that would be the only concern once it leaves California, if it's a potential RCRA hazardous waste.
So if we're going to Nevada, let's say, once it crosses that border, then all of a sudden it's no longer.
It wouldn't be universal waste, but if Nevada's hazardous waste thresholds are lower than higher, or they just default to RCRA hazardous waste, then it would default to RCRA hazardous waste.
One last question. The CPUC, there's a meeting coming up in a couple weeks. Yeah. You guys know about it. Yeah. So how are you guys working with CPUC? Or not?
No, we'll also be there.
We will be in attendance, as well as Cal Recycle, at the meeting, and April 3rd is the meeting you're referring to. Yes, we will be there.
Good morning. My name is Derek McCarty. I am with the Sacramento Municipal Utility District, and I may be the only person in here, I think, based on questions, that actively manage dispose of solar panels. What I would like to provide as a comment, if the DTSC and the EPA could get a forum together of actual users, disposers of the solar panels, and also manufacturers of the solar panels, so that way each prospective unit can speak from their perspective. Just being in this forum, it appears that there's not many people who have the hazardous waste background to be able to provide comments specifically to the management of solar panels. So I think if we could parallel groups, subject groups that are affected with the solar panel rule, to kind of brainstorm and come up with measures to make sure everybody understands, because I think at the end of the day, to ensure that all parties involved understand the rule to where panels can be managed effectively is the goal. But I think when these rules come up, it creates more confusion for the actual folks who are actually managing the in-life solar panel. And for me, as a generator of solar panel, it creates more chaos for me because my end user is not up to speed and understanding of the regulations.
What you're proposing is a more streamlined approach for this rulemaking process. We get that, and we'll keep that in the consideration. Thank you very much.
And I have analytical data for solar panels too.
Ricardo, are there any more questions in the mailbox before we wrap up. Go ahead and read it.
Kind of one question, but it's kind of long. It says, during the DTSC July 28, 2010 workshop, oh, I'm sorry, this was from Kirk, I'm sorry, Gallernew, with the city of San Diego, and I apologize for probably mispronouncing your last name. He said, during the DTSC July 28, 2010 workshop, I noted it was stated that the hazards posed by solar panels was based on the type of panel, that manufacturers were reluctant to share product information, and the recommendation was to check panel labels or check the product manufacturer for information. Is there a reason that after 8.5 years, DTSC does not have any additional information for handlers or generators that deal with abandoned panels? That's part one, and I can read part two after that.
At this point, we are all a brand new team. I am not aware of that specific comment, but I do appreciate that, and that is something that we can look into. I'm not familiar what happened back in 2012 and neither is the current project team. So we'll look into that.
And then the second part says, the lack of specificity of which panels are hazardous can result in significant loss to an entity which manages abandoned panels as universal waste or hazardous waste, when in fact the modules may be non-hazardous. Then the question is, can DTSC provide some detail on classifying these panels? Most entities managing abandoned panels do not have the resources to research the hazardous characteristics, even if the information exists, which is in question itself.
To answer that question, DTSC nor any other regulatory agency would probably have the bandwidth to do testing on everything that could possibly be a hazardous waste. I would say that we do recognize that, especially with abandoned materials, the material could be a hazardous waste. Again, the intent behind the universal waste regulations is that if one chooses to manage the material as a hazardous waste, they are able to do so under the universal waste rules without doing testing. However, if one believes the material is not hazardous waste and they have data, generator knowledge, or manufacturing labeling that could substantiate it, they can manage it as non-hazardous waste. So the only option I can think of at this point is for them to pursue the knowledge of figuring out who the manufacturer is and going back to that manufacturer. We would not have a handle on every manufacturer on every potential device that would be abandoned, whether it be a PV mod, an electronic device, or any other category of waste, which is in part why the requirements are on the generator to know and classify their hazardous waste. We do have general guidelines on how one can do that, and the department does have a program in place under contract to do it for a generator, but those situations don't come up very often because the regs are clear on the criteria.
Hi there. Yeah, this is Jeff Brown again with Recycle PV, and I've been in solar for 37 years and learning still about all this. So with all this documentation and all this regulations and reporting, so the current law today has been in place for how long? Managing a solar module.
There are no laws.
There are no, yeah.
Well, it's hazardous waste, right?
It would be hazardous waste management requirement.
So today, if a module is to be thrown away, it's supposed to end up in a hazardous waste landfill, right?
If
you have the knowledge that if the waste.
Okay, that was my question.
Yes.
So everything's supposed to be reported. So my question is, here in California, there's only one or two, my understanding, I'm still learning, I know of one, there might be more. How many hazardous waste facilities do we have in California? Two. Kettleman. So one's waste management, and the other one's the other guys, right? So with all the reporting, can the DTSC tell us, the solar industry, how many, we're using kilograms, how many kilograms in 2018, 2017, 2016 was put into lead vaults in Kettleman?
we understand that there will be a lot of waste, but that said, solar panels have a pretty long usage lifetime, right? So I guess what we're estimating is solar panel could last up to about 30 years. But during that time, then some solar panels could break by accident or by any other means. So what we are assuming in this proposed text is that not all solar panels are going to come down at, at one time as a waste, and there would be a sporadic collection and generation of waste that will happen, and it will be more of a gradual, maybe increase of solar panel waste, but not all solar panels that are installed right now are going to be a waste right away at all at the same time.
So the numbers, I mean, very conservatively, we know that it was somewhere between 10,000 to 30,000 modules in California alone last year that came off the roofs to be thrown away somewhere. Okay, because there's a lot of warranty claims, diode issues, all that stuff. So we're just asking if we're going to be required to do all this documentation, where's the documents? How many pounds were put into Kettleman last year? Can we get that answer?
Yes. So
yeah, I'm just curious. Is it public knowledge?
Exactly. And so. And I appreciate that. Again, when we have reporting and notification requirement, it is to fill those data gaps. And for those pieces of information that's provided to the department, yes, under the Public Resources Act, you can ask for the data, and we will then be able to provide those answers when asked. I am going to wrap it up by emphasizing a couple of things. Thank you to Chosu. And I do think that for all of the questions and her answers, I want to give her a round of applause and thank her so much for standing in the heat of the fire. So thank you.
Run to it, right? That's what I do.
We appreciate your attendance. We do appreciate all the questions that have come in. We appreciate the calls that have come in. Our intent right now is to get a base program in place, and I do apologize for not emphasizing this at the very beginning. It is true, Ricardo read a comment that's referenced 2010, and we have worked many, many years to get something in place so that what we do know, with those materials that are PV mods that we know are hazardous, there is a regulatory relief in terms of managing them in the end of life. So with this base program, what we are proposing is a way so that those who are handling, accumulating, treating, processing, collecting those materials, there are options so that they do not have to get a full hazardous waste permit if the PV mods that they are handling are hazardous waste. Once that's said, if there are other options available, if there are other recommendations and other considerations on how PV mods, especially with the new technologies, could be managed and managed safely under the Universal Waste Program, we also have statutory authority to do additional rulemaking packages. So what that means is just because we have proposed language that we really would like to see in place as a starting point, it doesn't mean we're done by any stretch of the imagination. So we want to grow. I appreciate your comment about having established work groups with manufacturers, with those who have knowledge on how to manage the end-of-life materials. This is an ongoing process, and with the technologies changing every day, I don't see that there's an end in the near future. So we have lots of opportunities to grow together to do this. So with that, I do want to thank you for your participation. I would encourage you to sign up for the listservs, to watch our website so that when we go into formal rulemaking, that you provide your comments. For those of you who want additional information, but not so much to change the language or maybe just for clarification, you have that opportunity to talk to Chosu just by calling her, sending in the email. And I will tell you the beauty of the email is that in writing, it may be clear to us to understand what the question is so that in writing, we can consider. I appreciate Rick's comment about there are other portions of Title 22, other portions of the statute that allow safe management exclusions, exemptions that are the reason why you wouldn't see them in Chapter 23. So having those comments in writing really help us to be able to provide a more proactive response to you. So thank you again for your participation. Thank you for CalRecycle for your attendance here. Thank you, Chosu, for a job well done. And we look forward to hearing from you next month and seeing some of you in April for the San Francisco workshop. Thank you.